good morning and welcome to Copernicus. My name is Sarah and I'm so happy you're here today. For those of you who don't know, Copernicus is a Bible study. We meet on Sunday mornings, 10 a.m. Eastern Standard Time for about an hour. At any time you can catch us, whether it's live or on replay, we love to have you. So, first things first, dads, happy Father's Day. I hope you have a great day. I hope they celebrate you big. Enjoy it, relax, have a great day. And then, all the festivities are over and it's back to normal after that. So anyway, we are glad you're here. So today we are in the third of a 4-week series called Thou Shalt Not. We are learning all about the 10 Commandments. And I don't know about you, but I have definitely learned some things that I never knew in all the years that I've known about the 10 Commandments. So if you have any comments, I'd love for you to drop them below. Let us know what you think. We're thrilled you're here. Hope you have a great day. We're going to turn it over to Tim.
Good morning. Thank you, Sarah. Good morning. Welcome back to Copernicus. We are on week 3 of Thou Shalt Not, and we're pretty excited about what this week holds for us. So let's jump right on in. So we have been through 3 commandments. We have, you shall have no other gods before me. You shall not make for yourself an image to worship, and you shall not take the name of the Lord your God in vain. So those are the first 3. And now we're going to jump into number 4. And this week will be a little different than the last 2, but you'll see how it works pretty quickly, I think. So here we go. Exodus 20, verse 8. Remember the Sabbath day by keeping it holy. So the first thing, we just need to define some words. Some that you know if you've been with us for a long time, and some may be new. So Sabbath is an interesting word. It means, it comes from the same word actually as holy. They derive from the same root, and it literally means to rest. Sabbath means to rest from labor. Okay? So in the Jewish world, this happened on the last day of the week, which was Saturday. And so the question is, this is the command. What does it look like? And that's a great question, so let's keep reading. 6 days you shall labor and do all your work, but the 7th day is a Sabbath to the Lord your God. So they worked 6 days a week, Sunday through Friday, took Saturday off, more or less, okay? Let's keep reading. On it you shall not do any work, neither you, nor your son, nor your daughter, nor your male or female servants, nor your animals, nor any foreigner residing in your town. So this is a pretty significant day. Nobody works on Saturday, right? Not even foreigners, not even the animals, okay? You can't make your son or daughter do what you didn't want to do. You mow the yard because it's Saturday, right? I don't mow on Saturdays. Nobody works. So this was the way that Jewish people observed the Sabbath. Now, before we move on, and there's more to talk about, but we need to answer a question that we posed last week. So here's the question. What do days, months, and years have in common that weeks do not? Okay, so let's talk about it. I'm going to answer the question for you. Did you think about it though? I mean, have you got an answer? Well, let's see if your answer matches mine, okay? So first of all, a day is a full rotation of the earth on its axis. Now we all know that, okay? But if you didn't know that, if you didn't know the world was a sphere or whatever, you could still figure out a day pretty much by yourself. You would observe morning and evening. Then the next day you would observe morning and evening. Next day you would observe, see how it works. So without any help, without any books or anything, you can figure out what a day is, right? Let's talk about months. A month is the full cycle of the moon. Now, here again, I'm no moonologist. What is that? Well, I don't know what you call that, right? I'm no moon expert, but even I could figure out if I was paying attention, I could watch all the cycles of the moon. And after a couple of 3 months, I'd be like, they did the same thing every 30 days or so, right? And so you could figure that out without a book, without anything. Years are a little more challenging, but by observing seasons, most even moderately observant people figure out that, hey, about every 365 days we start this whole thing over again. But here's the question. How do you determine what a week looks like? How do you get 7 days? Where did that come from? What makes a week? How would you observe a week? And that's a good question. And for the answer, we're going to continue reading out of Exodus 20. So let's look at verse 11. For in 6 days the Lord made the heavens, the earth, the sea, and all that is in them. But he rested on the 7th. Therefore the Lord blessed the Sabbath day and made it holy. And we see this word holy again. So what's holy mean? So remember, holy is separate or something that's different from everything else. God is holy because he's unique. There's no one else like him. There's nothing else like him, right? The Sabbath day was holy because it was set apart. It wasn't like the rest of the week. They didn't work on the Sabbath, right? So it was different because they rested. They worked 6 days a week, but they rested. Now, why is this significant? Well, just think about an agricultural world. This is an enormous act of faith, right? This is no small thing for a farmer to take a day off, not go out and check the fields, not go out and pull weeds, not go out and do whatever farmers do on one day, one entire day a week. That's an act of faith. You're saying, all right, Lord, it's all on you. I'm going to take a break. And so this is an enormous request on God's part from humans to trust him with 1 24-hour period during the week. Now, here's what's really interesting about this command. It's very controversial. We'll talk about that in just a second. It's very controversial, but this is the longest command in all of the 10 Commandments. And this is the most repeated of the 10 Commandments in all of the Old Testament. So it's got to be kind of important, wouldn't you think? So how do we keep this commandment? Well, it's an excellent question, so let's answer that. So the first thing is the easy one. You rest. Take the day off. Don't work, right? Now, if you're like me, look, I'm as guilty of this as anybody. I work 7 days a week because my job is just that kind of a job. And so, our joke is, well, I work when there's money to be made. You know what? That's not God's way. God's way is trust me with 1 day. And so we'll talk about that some more in a minute, but the first thing to do is rest. Second thing is don't do the same things on this day as you do the rest of the week. So this day needs to look different than anything else. So if you work, don't work. If you work during the rest of the week, don't work on this day. If you recreate the rest of the week, don't recreate on this day. This is a day for rest and for trusting God. And that brings to the third one. Spend time in devotion to the Lord. This is why, whether you observe the Sabbath on Saturday or Sunday, we'll talk about that in just a minute, whichever day observe, this is why people who observe the Sabbath on Saturday don't work on Saturday. This is why people who observe the Sabbath on Sunday, at least in the past, have ceased from work on Sunday and should. Now, in this particular way of thinking, we start the week thinking fresh thoughts. As opposed, we get bogged down in our work for 6 days, and then on the seventh day, we kind of get to recreate our thinking. Okay? Now, for people after Jesus, the best way to observe this day is to rest in the finished work of Jesus. As somebody who's entered into a covenant relationship with God through Jesus' death, burial, and resurrection, we can find rest in the finished work of Jesus. I'm no longer under the curse of death, under the guilt that the law brings, and we'll talk more about that this week and next week. Jesus has rescued me, and I can rest in that. Then we trust God. This is a day when we say, I'm not going to do it. It needs my attention. It calls for my attention. It wants me to give it attention, but I am not going to. I'm going to leave this in the Lord's hands. That would be a tremendous act of faith for many of us. So now we have to answer the question, Saturday or Sunday, right? Which one day? So there's a lot of controversy about this. In fact, there's been controversy about this since the beginning of Christianity. And there was a big to-do about, which day should we honor. Now, Jewish people, the Sabbath was their Sabbath. Saturday was their Sabbath. But for Christians, it was a different mindset because something had changed. And so let's look at, we can look at a lot of verses and a lot of passages. We're just going to look at one, and that's in Colossians. Now, Paul is writing to a church in a place called Colossae, and that's why it's called the Colossians, right? And so the Colossians were they were struggling. And some of their people were saying, you have to do it Jewish way. And some people say, well, we're not Jewish, we're Gentile. We follow Jesus, and, but we're not Jewish. We don't do all that stuff. So what do we do? And this is what Paul says. He says, therefore, don't let anyone judge you by what you eat or drink, or with regards to religious festivals, a new moon celebration, or a Sabbath day. Okay. Now, actually, this three, the festival, new moon, and Sabbath day, that way of speaking is right out of the Old Testament. That's the way that Old Testament writers very often referred to festivals and the monthly cycles that the Jewish people recognized and the Sabbath day. So this is absolutely right out of the Old Testament. Jewish people would have totally understood this. And Paul says, look, don't let anybody judge you by what you eat or drink or with regards to keeping Jewish festivals or even the Sabbath day. Okay? Why not? Good question. Here's what he says. Because these are a shadow of those new moons, festivals, and Sabbath days. Were a shadow of things to come. Okay? The reality, however, is found in Christ. So, yes, Saturday or Sunday. I think that for Christians, people who follow Jesus, the new Sabbath is Sunday. Now, Sunday is not the Sabbath day. Saturday is, okay? You can call it that if you want to, but you're just calling it wrong. But I think it's a new kind of Sabbath. We think about this, the old Sabbath, the old covenant had a story that you eat. That was Passover. Jesus gives us a new story that you eat. We call it communion or the Lord's Supper. The old covenant had a day at the end of creation that we rest on. Jesus' new covenant has a day at the beginning of a brand new creation that looks forward to a new life without death and a whole new kind of creation with a whole new kind of day of rest. So you may disagree with me, and that's okay. This should not be something that Christians divide over. Now, I know there are some that do, and we're not going to talk about all that today, but you should be firmly convinced in your own mind, and then you should do it to the Lord. You should keep the Sabbath, whether that's Saturday or Sunday, or another day for that matter. All right, let's move on. We have four commandments. Now, we've taken a lot of time to go through these 4 commandments, okay? And these 4 commandments are all centered on who we worship, how we worship Him, how we bear and carry His name to the world, and how we set apart time to demonstrate our trust and faithfulness to Him. So what are all these about? These are all about loving God. All right? So now we're going to look at the next 5 commandments, and then next week we'll look at the very last one, okay? So we're going to look at these a little differently than the first. I told you that. So they are, for one thing, a little easier than the first 4. So let's take a look at the next 4, and you'll see how this works. So the next one is honor your father and mother so that you may live long in the land the Lord your God has given you. Sorry, I'm quoting King James. That's the way I learned it, right? The next one is, you shall not murder, okay? The next one is, you shall not commit adultery. And the next one, you shall not steal. Now, you remember this picture. We talked about this last couple of weeks, how very often in our mindset, the 2 stone tablets are pictured as having 5 commands on one and 5 on the other. That's probably not true. But we referred to the first table and the second table. So and that's okay. Let me show you how this would work. So on the first table, you have no other gods before me, no graven images, don't take my name in vain, remember the Sabbath day, and then honor your father and mother. Okay? So these all have to do, even though you may not understand it yet, these all have to do with our vertical relationship with God. So from here up, right? Now, the second table has do not murder, do not commit adultery, do not steal, do not lie, and do not covet. And these all have to do with our horizontal relationship. So from me to you, and you to me. So what's really interesting is that the 5th commandment is often called the bridge commandment, because while it's on the first table and it does deal with our vertical relationship with God, it also begins the horizontal relationships, because obviously my parents are not God, right? So that's the way this goes. It's really cool. So you have commandments about loving God, commandments about loving your neighbor, and the bridge is honor your father and mother. So let's look at it. Here we go. Honor your father and mother so that you may live long in the land the Lord your God has given you. So this is a tough one, and I can already feel, I mean, when I teach this in youth groups, I get the same thing. It's always some pushback. But you don't know my parents, right? And you're right, I don't know your parents, right? You may have the worst parents in the history of mankind. Although, if you read your Bible, you'll see some that probably top some of the things your parents do. So, remember, this is a bridge commandment. So let's talk about how does this honor God? How is this a vertical thing? Well, the answer is pretty simple. God has made your parents in his image. Therefore, they have his authority. And then he gave you to your parents. And guess who named you? Your parents, right? And what you name is yours. And so that's the way the Bible writers would have thought about it. So God has given your parents authority, and in this case, authority over you, which means that for you to honor God, you have to keep this commandment: honor your father and mother. Now, what's really interesting is that out of all the commandments, this is the first one that we're given a promise with. In fact, it's the only one we're given a promise with. What's the promise? Well, if you honor your father and mother, you're going to live long in the land that the Lord your God has given you. This is not, when I was a kid, I thought this meant, if I obey my parents, I'm going to live to be really old. That's not what it says, is it? That's not what it says at all. It says, honor your father and your mother so that you may live long in the land the Lord your God has given you. So God is telling Moses and the people, he say, look, honoring parents is a building block for a healthy relationship with God and a healthy relationship with humans. If you get this right, the rest of these commandments are going to make sense. They're going to, and when they make sense, and when you honor them, when you obey the rest of the commandments, I will bless you for a long time in the land that I'm giving you. See, it's not like I get to live to be 100. It's you as a people. So that makes this commandment really interesting, because this commandment is, if you can't keep this commandment, you're disobeying most of the first four. So for instance, if you don't honor your father and mother, you're disobeying the first one, because you're saying, well, God, I know that you get most things right, but you didn't get this thing right, so there must be somebody else who knows better than you. That's having another God, whether you name him or not. What about no graven images? Well, remember, we don't make images because humans are God's image. And so if you don't honor God's image on another human, then you are saying, well, God, you may have these images that you made, they may look like you, and they may have your authority, but I'm not going to yield to that. So you have to give that authority to someone else, even if it's yourself, where you become your own image, your own God. No taking the name of the Lord your God in vain. Well, if you can't honor your parents, then you're not bearing God's name well, because you're disobeying this commandment. And even the Sabbath day is going to be tough. Because if you can't rest and you can't trust God, that even though your parents may not be exactly what you like, that you can trust God that he gave them to you and that he knows what he's doing, then resting on any day is going to be tough, because you're always going to be in conflict with your parents. So that's the vertical relationship. How does this affect the horizontal relationship? Well, similarly, you say, oh, wait a minute, just because I disobey my parents or don't honor my parents doesn't mean I'm going to be a murderer. Well, you may think that's the case, but we're going to find out next week that you may be wrong, because if you hate your parents, you've already murdered in your heart. We'll talk about that next week. But think about this. I mean, if you can't honor your parents, your mother and father who are together, how are you going to honor a spouse? That doesn't even make sense, right? If you are not going to honor your parents, you're stealing the honor from them that is due them. And if you are just in conflict with them, it's like you're coveting their authority over yourself. And so this is truly the bridge commandment. Okay? And so we've got to get, and look, it's tough. And people go, well, what if, and so let's talk about, how do we keep this commandment? First of all, it's important to note that Jesus obeyed his parents. Okay? And second, it's important to note that in totalitarian societies, the first institution to be diminished and then eventually destroyed is the family. Okay? And it's the family as God designed it. Okay? Mother and a father with children. That's the way God designed it. It's a serious command. God takes it super seriously. And so seriously, he doesn't say, if you don't do it, I'm going to kill you. He says, if you do it, I'm going to make your life better as a society. That's what he's telling them. So let's talk, how do we keep this commandment? Now we're going to put all these up at once because they're kind of related. You'll see how this works. So, cheerful obedience, respectful address, forgiveness, and expressions of gratitude. They all work together. So just think about this. If you're a child, if you're a teenager, in fact, let me just erase all that. If you live in your parents' house and they pay any of your bills, right? Which if you live in their house, they're paying something. You owe them cheerful obedience. Go clean your room. Oh man, that's not cheerful obedience, okay? It's like, son, didn't I ask you not to park your car in that parking space? Oh man, it's not that big a deal. That's not cheerful obedience, right? Cheerful obedience. Yes, sir. Absolutely, Mom. I would do that right away. Okay, that's cheerful obedience. Respectfully address them. You know, I know it's old-fashioned, but yes, sir, and no, sir, yes, ma'am, and no, ma'am are still appropriate in a lot of places, but especially here. Don't calling them names. That's just not right. And then, if your parents have done something wrong to you, especially if you're an adult, look, if you're looking at an adult, if you're an adult whose parents have wronged you, look at me. You need to forgive them. They're losing no sleep over whatever you're holding against them. This is going to kill you. Forgive them and express gratitude. You know what would resolve a whole bunch of your family problems and problems with your parents is if you went to your mom, you went to your dad, or went to both of them if you can, and said, look, we have a lot of differences. There are a lot of things I'm not sure if I agree with you on, but I want to say thank you for giving me a home, for giving me shelter, for giving me clothing, for feeding me all these years, and I love you for it. And you're going to be surprised at the reaction, and it may eliminate some of the problems that you have. All right, let's move on because we got to go quick. Ready? The next one is thou shalt not murder, and finally we're like, thank you. This is one that I'll get this one right. I may not have got the other 5 right, but I'm going to get this one right. So let's talk about this. First of all, the word is you shall not murder. Now, the King James says you shall not kill, and the reason is because in the 1600s, kill meant murder, but in our world it does not. Murder is the right word, okay? And you think, well, it doesn't matter, it's the same thing. No, it's not the same thing, and I can prove it to you. You know, I live in Georgia, and we have mosquitoes that drive, okay? They're huge, right? And if I smack one on my neck and I kill it, I say I killed a mosquito. I don't say I murdered it. I don't ever do that, okay? Think about this. If you're at work and a coworker accidentally dies in an accident, so something falls on him and kills him, or he's pulled into a machine and it kills him or whatever. You say the worker was accidentally killed. You don't say the worker was accidentally murdered, because murder is different, okay? So killing is the taking of any life. It could be animal, vegetable, mineral, human, deliberately or by accident. You kill something. Taking a life, a human life, legally is not murder. And there's a place for that. We'll talk more about that in a bit. Murder is the illegal, immoral taking of a human life. Okay? So you cannot take the image of God from another human being without God being involved in the consequences. It's not going to happen. So what does you shall not murder prohibit? Let's talk about that. And it's really simple. Premeditated, intentional murder, obviously it prevents that. Voluntary and involuntary manslaughter, it prohibits that. Negligent homicide, it definitely prohibits that. Suicide, it prohibits that. So there is actually, it's a really interesting thing. There are only 5 suicides in the entire Bible. Suicide is not the unpardonable sin, but it's a violation of this commandment. Just as if you murder somebody else, you're just murdering a human being intentionally. This is not different. Now, there's one more, but before we talk about that, let me just tell you about negligent homicide. There's actually a verse in the Bible that says that if you have an ox and it gores another person, you have to kill the ox, right? But if the ox has been goring people and you didn't kill it and it kills a person, then your ox dies and so do you. Negligent homicide. Because you knew this was going to happen. You knew it was, and you didn't do anything about it. So there's one more thing that this prohibits, and this is just one of those controversial things, but before you react, hear me out, because I think it's really interesting how we came to this. It also prohibits abortion. Now, you may say, well, and there's all kinds of controversy about this, but let me show you a verse that you know part of. You just didn't know how it was connected to this. And it's in Exodus 21. It's the very next chapter. Verse 22 says this. If people are fighting and hit a pregnant woman and she gives birth prematurely, but there is no serious injury, the offender must be fined whatever the woman's husband demands and the court allows. So this is pretty simple. Two guys get in a fist fight, whatever, or they're arguing, and they push a woman who's pregnant, and it causes her to give birth prematurely. But the baby's fine. It's inconvenient though, and it's painful for the woman. So the husband then, well, they will go to court, and the husband will say he has to pay me X amount of dollars, and the guy will pay X amount of dollars. But everybody's fine. Now, what happens if there's injury to the child? That's the next verse. But if there's serious injury, you're to take life for life, eye for eye, tooth for tooth, hand for hand, foot for foot, burn for burn, wound for wound, bruise for bruise. Okay? Now, so here's what happens. Two guys get in a fight. They push this woman by accident. The child and the woman are not they're not the focal point of the fight, but they just get in it by accident. And the woman goes into premature labor, and she delivers this child. But this child has a deformity as a result of being pushed. Maybe he's got a deformed arm. Maybe he's blind. Whatever that child's injury is, the people who are in a fight, they are injured the same way. And if the woman prematurely delivers and the baby is born dead, then the lives of these men will be taken as well. Life for life, eye for eye, tooth for tooth, etc. Okay? So, you've heard this part, this eye for eye thing, but I bet you didn't know it was applied. It's applied to other things too, but it was applied to this. Now, this is what happens if a child is injured by accident. This is what happens if a child is killed in the womb by accident. Do you think it's going to, seriously, do you think it's going to be any less if it's on purpose? No, it's not. It's exactly the same. So, what does this law not prohibit? Okay, here's what it does not prohibit. It does not prohibit self-defense, capital punishment, just war, eating meat, or sacrifices. Okay, it doesn't do that. And there's a long controversy about this, but let's just talk about the couple. Capital punishment. Capital punishment is mentioned actually before the law. It is the only one of the laws that's mentioned in all 5 books of the Pentateuch, of Moses' books: Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy. It's the only law that's mentioned in all 5. Okay? War is not necessarily prohibited. Some wars are, but some are not. Killing in war is not necessarily prohibited. So there are lots of things that this does not prohibit. When somebody says you should not kill, and then they put everything on the same blanket, they're not reading it right. And so that's murder. Now we're going to talk more about this next week. Let's jump to the next one. Here we go. You shall not commit adultery. Now this one's difficult. Adultery threatens the union that God designed. Again, I told you it was popular, not popular, right? That's the way it is. Okay? Here's the way God designed marriage. Man and a woman, they get married. The whole picture, the whole idea behind a man and a woman getting married is procreation. Now, we know that not every sexual encounter produces children. But under normal circumstances, barring disease or age, this is the model. This is how you get children. This is how you keep the rule, the thing that God said at the very beginning, which says, multiply and replenish the earth. That's how you do it, okay? This is God's institution. Sex was God's idea. Marriage was God's idea, okay? And so God says, don't commit adultery. Now, see how long it is? See how long this command is? And you know what you don't see? An asterisk, except in the case of, or except on Thursdays when there's no asterisk. Now, you may say, well, I'm not married, so this doesn't apply to me. And I would say not so fast. Just think about this. If as a single person, never been married, I sleep with another woman, and then I don't marry her, but she marries somebody else, I have slept with another man's wife. You say, well, that's really strict. Yeah, it is. You know why? Because God is serious about his institutions. And here's another thing. If you don't even, whether or not you agree with this or not, this is how the Bible understands marriage. It's as a picture of God's relationship with his people. So that's why when God's people worship other gods, they worship idols, God calls that, he compares idolatry to adultery. It's the way it goes. Now let's go to, it's complicated, right? You thought, man, I had this one right under wraps, but not so much. Let's jump to number 8. Here we go. You shall not steal. So this means you shall not steal. It's really not that difficult. It means you can't take anything from another person. Now, one of the most important things to understand about this is the way that these former slaves, they just escaped from Egypt. These former slaves are going to understand this. You shall not steal another human. which is why when people use the Bible to condone slavery, they were having to twist and turn and make all. This says you can't go kidnap another human being and make him a slave. Now, slavery in biblical times is not the same as slavery in the United States during the Civil War times. It's not. They're not the same. There are similarities, but they're not the same. And we're not going to talk about slavery for a long time, but let's all agree that based on this one law, this one Ten Commandments, that slavery is wrong. We can all agree on that. Private property was understood as normal. It was not a bad thing. You don't steal from another person because that's their property. Okay? Here's some other things you don't steal. Property, people, reputations, dignity, trust, intellectual property, life, or glory. Okay? And so you can see how these all work together. So intellectual property, stealing another person's words, we call that plagiarism, right? You're not allowed to take from another person. Number 9, let's do real quick. Number 9, you shall not give false testimony against your neighbor. This has 2 meanings, okay? First of all, false testimony kind of has the idea of court, right? So you're not allowed to perjure yourself in court. And we still hold this. I swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, nothing but the truth, so help me God, right? So we're going to tell the truth. Don't lie in court. That's the first meaning. You want to know what the second meaning is? Don't lie, right? Don't lie. And this goes to how God feels about gossip and slander. God does not see your truth, my truth, his truth, and her truth. God sees truth based on his definition of good and his standard of truth. And so when you lie, you can't say, well, that's my truth. It's not true if it's not God's definition of truth. Now, why did God give these commandments? And a lot of people say, well, God didn't. Moses just plagiarized these from other societies. And there's some truth underlying that. There were other societies that had some of these same laws. Don't murder, don't steal, don't lie. Those are laws, and Hammurabi had those. So did Moses plagiarize them? Or, I would argue, did they? Now, obviously, Hammurabi's code was written long before Moses. Okay? So Hammurabi didn't plagiarize from Moses. But here's the thing you need to understand. Nobody was surprised about the command. I mean, Moses didn't come off the mountain and go, hey, no murder. And everybody was like, what? Are you kidding me? He didn't say, no adultery. And they're like, man, it's been so good so far. And now it's all, no, don't lie. People weren't, no, don't steal. People were like, what? Are you kidding? And we do that every Thursday night. No, there were no surprises. Why weren't there any surprises? Well, you might say, well, because these other cultures had these laws. That might be one reason, but I think there's another reason. And to find that, we're going to go to the New Testament, to the second part of your Bible, into the book of Romans. Romans is a letter written to people in Rome, that makes sense, right? By a guy named Paul, who had previously been a murderer of Jesus followers. And then he met Jesus and became a follower himself, and he went from trying to kill Christians to trying to be killed for being one, right? And he's talking about the law of Moses, these 10 commandments, and he makes this argument. He says, Jews can expect to be judged by the 10 commandments, right? And so if they keep the law, they'd probably be all right, right? But the people who don't have the 10 commandments, like in other countries, they don't know them, and so they wouldn't be judged by them. So it sounds good, right? I mean, what will they be judged by? Well, let's find out. So Paul says, indeed, when Gentiles, that's not Jewish people, when Gentiles who do not have the law, the 10 commandments, do by nature things required by the law, don't murder, they are a law for themselves, even though they do not have the law. And what's that mean? Well, there are lots of people, in almost every society you go to, murder is wrong, at least in some form. Lying is wrong, at least in some form. Stealing is wrong, at least in some form. And so even though they don't have the 10 commandments, they've articulated God's law as given in the 10 commandments, and now they have to keep it. And they'll be judged by it, even though they've never had the 10 words. They don't have the 2 tablets or whatever. Now, why is that? That's a good question, so we keep reading. Here we go. They show, these people who have the law, these laws, but they don't have the 10 commandments, they show that the requirements of the law are written on their hearts, their consciences also bearing witness, and their thoughts sometimes accusing them, and at other times even defending them. So how did the law get written on these Gentile people's hearts? They don't have the 10 commandments. Have you ever felt guilty about something but not known why? It's because God's law is written on your heart. Have you ever felt justified in doing something, but you didn't know why? There's no rule for that. It's because God's law is written on your heart because you're made in his image. This is why nobody was surprised when he said don't murder. They weren't like, oh, the Ten Commandments, listen, the Ten Commandments are transcendent. They spring from the nature of the Creator so much that even an image bearer who has no knowledge of his Creator has a level of understanding, at least some of these things, automatically. So, when we look at the Ten Commandments, there are three things that surface. These laws are the revelation of the nature of God and how He relates to His creation and how they should relate to Him and each other. These laws are transcendent. The fact that they're written down is not what makes them superior. The fact that who they come from makes them superior. And so, because they come from God, because they're transcendent, all human beings will stumble on one or more of these laws by accident. And to break any of these laws is to be in wrong relationship with God and man. So when you feel guilty, the object is not for you to draw away and start justifying your actions and create a new identity for you. No, guilt is designed to bring you to God to get in right relationship with Him based on His definition of good as outlined in the Ten Commandments. Now we have one more law to go, and it's Exodus 20 verse 17. And we're going to tackle that last commandment next week. And then we're going to see, first of all, what Jesus thought about some of these commandments. And then we're going to discover, as we look at how Jesus looks at the commandments and how the New Testament writers look at the commandments, that there's something about us that we won't like and something about God that we're going to absolutely love. So don't be late for that. And we'll talk about this. This week, think about this. Are you in right relationship with God? Can you look at your relationships to humans and go, well, if I'm treating my human people like this, I might be in wrong relationship with God. Think about your relationship with God, vertical, and your relationship with people, horizontal, this week. And we're going to wrap it up next week, and I think you'll be surprised. So let's pray. Well, Father, we are grateful for your love and for the Ten Commandments. And we are just in awe of who you are and how great you are, that this is the kind of person that you are, and that you've imprinted that on us. And so as we think about our relationship to you and to other people this week, help us to be willing to accept your definition of good and to yield and submit to you as our God. And we pray it in Jesus' name. Amen.